Recording the class. Okay, now I'm going to just cut this part out anyway once I figure out how to edit. But well, hello everybody. This is Keith Orlean, the BizTalk Weekly podcast, and
this is Gregg Johnson. And it's
hello,
good to be here again, Keith.
Yes, I can't believe another week has gone by. Actually, a little more than a week.
Right.
We cheated a little bit this week because of certain obligations, but we're here and ready to chat about business.
Absolutely. I look
Yes,
forward to it all week long.
I know, I do as well. So this week's topic is starting a business, something that I am very familiar with from 40 years as an entrepreneur. And Gregg, you as well have just started your own business. You purchased a franchise.
Right. That's right.
So you'll be talking about that as part of what we do today. As a matter of fact, why don't you tell us, why don't we get it started with why you bought a franchise and what drove you to that decision as opposed to just starting from scratch?
Sure. One is I wanted to do something different as I was getting to a point in my career where I I didn't want to go to work every day and do a 9 to 5 job. I wanted to have something with more flexibility and something more that I could own and control. I settled on business coaching because I felt it really aligned well with my background and what I like to do. And then, finally, you asked the question about choosing a franchise versus just hanging out my own shingle. And I really wanted to have the backup that comes with a company like Focal Point, lots of training opportunities, lots of resources to rely upon. And it just felt like for me, that was a better approach than doing this all on my own.
Makes perfect sense to me. So now, having heard your reasoning, my background as an entrepreneur for 40 years encompasses starting a business from scratch without a franchise.
Right.
And evolving into actually creating a franchise. So where I became a franchisor, okay, you became a franchisee. And that has more to do with my desire to do everything that's more difficult. Don't ask me why, that's a whole other story. But, as a franchisor, I learned a lot. I learned how to create processes for doing business, because the whole idea of buying a franchise is that it's pretty much cookie cutter. You don't have to think about all the different things that a new person or someone who's starting a new business, needs to know an awful lot. And most often they don't know enough. That's where a lot of mistakes happen. So franchise is a safer route.
Right. I think it's the old, not having to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah.
When you go a franchise. And I'm not, it's an individual choice for somebody. There isn't a right or wrong answer there, Keith. It's whatever you as a potential business owner are more comfortable with. So I don't want somebody to think, well, you have to go a franchise route. That's not the case at all. There's plenty of companies out there. In fact, there's a lot of businesses that don't make sense from a franchise standpoint. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it really depends upon, personality, finances, the understanding that you just don't know enough to be, as a beginner, to start your own business from scratch.
right.
I loved learning, and unfortunately, when you in business, you learn by doing, and you make your mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes can be costly. And I made a number of costly mistakes throughout my career. But looking back, I don't know if I would have been well suited for a franchise, because in a franchise environment, even though it's your own business, you're really following somebody else's blueprint. And I guess I'm not that good at living within the lines of, okay, you wake up and every day you do it this way, that way, and the other way, because the franchisor says this is the way to do it. And I don't.
I think
Right.
Keith, you're hitting on maybe another topic for us to talk about, in the coming weeks, is really talking about could be franchise versus
Yeah, that's a very good
non-franchise.
point.
Because I think it would be an interesting topic to delve into in some detail.
No, that's a very good idea. And, we're meeting with Tamika this afternoon, actually
Right.
at 2:00, who's a franchise broker. So I think there's some real synergies in terms of that type of conversation. And I do think it's a great topic for
Yeah.
one of our future podcasts.
Yeah.
But having said that, and we've given, a basic reasons maybe not to. And again, I think it's a much deeper topic that would, obviously take more time. Let's delve into the areas of business and starting a business that someone who's just starting out needs to think about. So I'm going to start with asking you questions on the finance side.
Okay.
Because obviously, without money, it's kind of hard to do either choice. So what do you believe now, having been through the process, what are the most common challenges that startups face on the finance side when they're just getting started?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is absolutely just having enough capital, cash to run your business, right? Because you get started in your business and on day one, you don't have any clients typically. So how do you make that investment, the upfront investments you need to make in sales and marketing? Maybe you have to invest in operations. You've got to make some investments into the business and having enough cash to finance those until the time when you start generating revenue and the business could start to be profitable.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would say that when I did fail, undercapitalization was probably the number one reason for those failures.
Yeah, and I think and having that cash is different from being profitable. You'll see companies that are profitable, but they run out of cash because, again, depending on the business, if you have inventory, you have to finance. If you have receivables, you have to finance. All of those things start to tug at the cash strings and can, you can blow through the money a lot quicker than maybe you thought you would.
That brings up a very interesting point of when someone chooses the type of business to go into, whether it's a franchise or a standalone brand that you're starting. In certain businesses, it's much more capital intensive, like you just
Absolutely.
mentioned.
Right.
That there are receivables that you have to take into account, inventory, which you have to take into account. And it requires a lot more cash in those scenarios as opposed to a straight up service business where you're selling a service where you don't, basically it's cash and carry.
Right.
You get paid as you go. If you don't sell, you don't make money, but you also don't have to sit there with receivables and payables.
Right. And I don't have, being a service business like I am, I don't have much overhead. I work remotely. I don't have any kind of really infrastructure costs. But you take a business, I looked at some other franchises and they would have required a physical building location. So I would have had a lease, which is a fixed cost. I would have had equipment to purchase. So in some cases, the upfront cost can be significantly higher and the overhead costs can be significantly higher in one business than another. And those are the kind of things I think it's really important to consider when you're just starting out, or even before you start out?
So, every answer brings more questions. So, which is what I love about our conversations is it's like, so now I think about it, I go, okay, so you don't start a business or like you don't build a house from the roof down. You got to start with a foundation. So I think about this now in my own history. It's like now, today, if I were to start my optical business that I had, retail locations,
Mhm.
I would have immediately hired someone like yourself to understand a cash flow analysis of the particular model I was considering, to understand how much cash will I really need. One, I had to build a store, okay, construction costs. I had to buy equipment and fixtures. I had to buy inventory. So the capital expenditure was pretty large. And back then, this is 1985. I think it cost about 150,000. I don't know what that is in today's dollars, but I'm sure it's creating $500,000 in
Right.
investment, if not more.
Yeah.
And I opened up 17 of them. So,
Wow.
yeah. And again, these were decisions I made. Doesn't matter whether they're good or bad. It all starts with planning. And it starts with understanding money, and I said, I think in our first podcast, that it's not my game. I'm great at selling and marketing, but when it comes to money, I need someone like you.
Keith, I think you just touched on a really important uh, concept. You said the word planning. And I think that's another reason that sometimes small businesses struggle is they don't have a plan. And you really, a plan and your finances kind of go hand in hand, right? You got to have a plan so you know the type of money you're going to have to spend and make an investment into this business. So having a plan, I think, is really important. And I'm not talking about an extensive book that you have to write. I'm just saying having an idea of what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, what you want to accomplish, have some timeline tied to those plans and goals, and then you can adjust as things progress. You can see what's working, what's not working, what things do I need to kind of jump on right away, but always having that plan to fall back on and say, hey, am I executing the tasks, the initiatives that I need to be successful?
Yeah, and that requires discipline. Another one of my weaknesses early in my career. I was young and anxious and hungry, so I couldn't wait to just, build my empire.
Right.
So I was running before I was crawling. So I guess, if we would end today with right now, which we're not, we're going to continue, we still have some things to discuss. I would say the big takeaway is financial planning along with business planning is crucial before you spend a dime.
Yeah, I think you really, if you just said how excited you got about really getting going when you started your business, but I think just taking a step back, taking a deep breath, putting a plan together, and then understanding the kind of cash you're going to need uh, to make some of those early one-time investments in your business to make sure that your business model makes sense, right? You lay this plan out, you look at the cash that's required. Let's say it's going to take $100,000 and you have $20,000 in your bank account. Well, that doesn't add up, right? So you got to figure out, hey, maybe I'm not ready to start my business yet, or I need to find another source of cash to help finance my business. Maybe it's partners, there's crowdfunding, there's bank loans, there's all sorts of other sources of cash, but those are all things that really need to be considered up front.
That makes a lot of sense because when I got started, I had very little cash, and I became very adept at borrowing money. And this can also be a trap for businesses, is that you have a great business model, whether it's franchise or non-franchise. And the finance people see it as something that's financeable. Okay, and you start borrowing money, and sometimes you overborrow because you're so afraid that you're going to run out of money that you borrow too much. Okay, and now you have debt service. So now you got to manage the debt service, and if the sales, which rarely meet expectations, right at the beginning, you've added an additional expense. So I think it's really a balancing act on the finance side. And I think that's why having either an accountant, and a lot of times you can't afford a finance person in a startup, but everyone can afford an accountant, even if it's once a month that, they come in, they do your books, they tell you where you're sitting from a cash position, a real cash position, because sometimes you could see, oh, sales were great. Okay, the numbers, look wonderful on paper. The accountant comes in and starts showing you how much you spent last month. Okay, and you overspent your budget. You spent a lot of money on media. You bought too much inventory. I'm telling you my life story. So basically, and this all comes from the overzealous excitement of being in business. Now, yes, I learned, okay, and I adjusted, but I think the goal of what we do in our conversations and even in each of our own coaching businesses, mine on the sales side, yours on the more of the leadership and finance and operation side, is to really give a full scope of what's necessary, when you start a business.
I think it's so critical, Keith, to have kind of those trusted advisors around you. Like you said, maybe it's an accountant, maybe it's your banker, maybe it's a partner, or a spouse, a best friend, somebody you can trust, that's going to help. If you don't have the financial understanding, right? And a lot of us don't, because that's not our background. But finding somebody who can really help kind of coach through that process of financing the business and understanding costs that you're going to incur and the investment you need to make. It's hard to do everything by yourself as a business owner. So it's important to find those trusted advisors who can help. And again, it doesn't have to be a big investment into an accountant, or most bankers will work with you. Obviously, if you're doing business with them already, maybe you got a bank account there, or you are looking at taking out a loan. Financial planners might be another source. So
Yeah.
there's people out there, and it doesn't have to be a huge expense to find those kind of folks who are willing to help guide you through that especially that initial startup process.
Yeah, I think another resource that, just came to mind is that when I was starting out, there was no internet, and I didn't have access to the kind of information that's available today. And there's a lot of free resources with a simple Google search. Now we have artificial intelligence, which provides another resource for doing research. That you could find free webinars. We do that ourselves, you and I, where we're just now we're talking about things that would be very helpful for anybody that's starting a business, okay, to hear our perspective from our experience. And one of the things that we'll probably do as we move along is we'll find some people that are starting a business or just started the business who are much younger than us, which is not saying much, of course, because we're so old.
They'd almost have to be.
Right, exactly. So, because I think it's good to give our audience, those different perspectives of somebody who's just starting out, who's young, and find out what they did in planning their business.
I agree, Keith. I think that would be really interesting to have some folks on who who have just started a business. Certainly I can bring some of that perspective. You can bring some of that perspective, but every story is unique. So it's always good to hear more and more stories, because for somebody who is considering starting a business, gaining that knowledge and hearing those stories, it can be invaluable in terms of how it can impact your own business.
No, I agree. I think, when we started to talk about the topics for today and starting a business, we outlined what we want to talk about. It's a much larger subject, and we're not going to get to everything today. But Greg, what questions do you have for me on the sales and marketing side that you think that people would like to know about?
I think one thing would be interesting, Keith, is what strategies might you recommend to somebody who's starting up a business to acquire those initial customers, because that's so important to get those clients in, as quickly as possible, as we were talking about from that cash flow finance standpoint. But what kind of things might a new business owner do to acquire those initial clients?
Yeah, so again, it's a more complex question because it's based on, is the business brick and mortar, what I call old school, versus online, or both. And my suggestion would be, if I was consulting with any new business, is that you have to have an online presence. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily have an e-commerce business, because not every business is suited for the e-commerce side, but you have to have a presence. You have to be able to start to build a brand, whether it's your business brand and your personal brand. Okay, and we'll get into that in future episodes of what that means to build. And we did a little bit of that with our guests last week. But the personal brand and the business brand are pretty much on an even keel from the beginning. So in order to get people confident with a new business, they want to know who's running that business. So again, and your question relates to getting new clients from the beginning, you have to market. I mean, it's as simple as that. Now, there's a lot of different ways to market. Okay, when I had my retail stores, every week I was in the Penny Saver. I was in other direct mail pieces.
Sure.
So that was my regular mode of advertising. I was very aggressive every week, 52 weeks a year. I didn't say, oh, it's the slow time, I'm not going to advertise, I'll save some money. That only hurts a business, because you lose momentum.
Sure.
And especially in today's world, where it's so difficult to get the attention of people, it's like out of sight, out of mind. If you decide that you're going to go out of your marketing plan and not do something for a while, the new guy's going to step in, and then
Right.
all of a sudden it's like, what happened? I lost these customers. My business is down. So consistency is really the key. But the type of media is very much going to be dependent on the type of business. So obviously,
it sounds like, Keith, you're saying that it's not a one size fits all, and it's not just a one approach solution, but it sounds like you're saying that you really need multiple marketing avenues to be successful. Would that be fair to say?
yeah, that's fair to say, because again, when you're a business that's strictly brick and mortar with some online presence, you're really community based. So depending on the type of business, like a restaurant will draw from a larger population of people. People drive for a great restaurant 10, 15 miles or more. Okay, but in my case, when I had the eyeglass store, they weren't going to unless they got a recommendation from a family member, they weren't coming from one side of the city to the other side to see me.
Mhm.
Online, there's no real barriers for doing business. I mean, if you have a product that is global in nature, meaning that it's universal, you could sell something, and it's look at Amazon. Amazon does business all over the globe. So, but there is no one size fits all. A lot of it is budgetary. How much money do I have for marketing? Which really, that budget will be determined with consultation with finance. Okay, as a
Right.
perfect example, how sales and finance work together is, I'd say, so Greg, how much money should I spend on marketing? And your answer would be, well, that's, I mean, you can give the answer for me. It's, I don't have to tell you your answer, but
Right. I mean, it depends, right? It's
yeah,
how much money do you have available?
right.
What are some alternatives that you can look at for marketing? So you like you said, you might market online, you might market more in a more traditional approach of direct marketing or direct mailing or those sorts of things. So it's really having all those options on the table, looking at cost of each of those and which ones you think are going to be more effective given your business. Some are going to be more effective than others based on the business you're starting up.
Yes. So, and one of the things, and this goes back in my earliest days, I hired an agency for my business because I had opened multiple locations, and he took me to school on learning about media and how you research different media, and different industries have certain rules of thumb about what percentage of your gross spending on media.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think in my business back then, I think it was 6% of gross revenues should be spent on media. Now, if you're in an industry where your margins are like paper thin, 6% might be like a ridiculous amount of money to spend.
Right. Mhm.
We had a pretty high gross margin in our business.
Mhm.
So 6% was not, out of the question. And then it becomes measuring results, because then you start to build a metric of, okay, we spent $1,000 last week, and I start counting coupons back then. So basically I got, okay, we have 10 coupons that came in, and we look at the 10 people that gave us those coupons, and they spent $5,000. That's a nice return on investment. I spent 1,000, I got 5,000 in, my cost of the marketing was X, and I have this much profit to the bottom line. Now, I learned that from experience, but in a startup, you wouldn't have that experience to even think about that. You need a finance person to give you those, those foundational rules of how you manage a media budget to know whether you're spending appropriately,
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something else really key, Keith, and that is once you are running a business, it's really important to measure those critical aspects of your business. And like you just said, to be able to measure how effective certain marketing approaches are, that's invaluable to know that, because that helps you refine your marketing plan and it helps you understand, hey, maybe I should spend a little bit more money on online advertising, or maybe I should spend more on, a local newspaper because that's where my clients are, or potential clients are finding information out about, where they might want to do business. It all comes down to really understanding who your ideal client is and then trying to figure out where it is they're spending their time and where they're getting their information from.
So, and what really is important is it still comes down to planning.
Yeah.
It's really understanding that there are a lot of pieces that need to be in place before you make that commitment. The commitment could be I'm signing a lease, or it could be I'm building a website. All these things cost money, and those go into startup costs, so which depletes your cash.
Right.
So this is, like I said, this is a much more complex conversation, but I think that what we've hit upon today are two key areas. One is finance. Sales, I mean, we didn't touch that much on sales, we really focused more on marketing. Okay,
Mhm.
but marketing drives sales.
Right.
So if you don't market, okay, you have less chance of seeing customers, especially if you're an online business, because there's way too much competition, to get at the top of Google. Okay, where you're either gonna, pay for it or build what's called organic build, which basically comes from lots of marketing. So what I want to do as we're coming to the end of this episode is I think we need a part two, okay, of starting a
Yeah.
business. And what I want to do in our next episode is put it all together, how operations, and finance works with sales and marketing, okay, from the beginning, right? Before you start your business, while you're making your decision, and then once your business is operational, okay, keyword operational and operations, okay, how does it get managed? And is it managed all by, yourself because you don't have the budget to hire people?
Right. Right.
Which, I mean, I started my business with my wife, so basically, and I hired a sales guy, and I wore a lot of hats, which is another thing we'll talk about in future episodes, is about learning what you do and having enough knowledge so that you, at least when you talk to your accountant, you know what they say makes sense to you.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, our time really goes fast when we get on
Yeah, I
these.
feel like we're gonna have to, at some point, we're probably gonna have to go up to at least 45 minutes to an hour, because we could talk about this stuff like for hours.
I know. I know. I know.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah, so this was great. I think we've given people enough to chew on for what it takes to start a business and finance a business. And I look forward to next week's episode.
Me too. We'll get back on our normal Tuesday
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.
calls and we can continue. It works out kind of nice if we, it's Friday today. Well, in just a couple more days, we'll come back together
I
and
know, I'm
like
so
you said, we'll
excited.
do part two.
I know, because listen, we could have gone on for another hour with this
I know.
particular topic.
I know.
So I'm going to sign off. This is Keith Orlean for BizTalk Weekly.
And this is Gregg Johnson.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. We'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith.